Yeah, no, right, for the multi-seat.
That's what I'm saying, that might be more sense.
To start with, right, no, honestly, my biggest concern was with the mayor election and having my over tomorrow. Last thing.
Next year, you know, it's like.
Who's in charge of this rodeo?
Yeah.
It's 7:30.
I know.
Somebody come, there you are.
Yeah. All right, we will now call to order the February 27th, 2023 meeting of the FAMPO Policy Committee. If you can, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, at this time, Ms. Tuzell, will you please call the roll? Oh,
Ms. Tuzell is recovering from COVID, so we will have to do without that, and Becky Golden will do the roll.
thank you, Ms. Golden.
Jason Graham,
Here.
Matthew Kelly,
Here.
Tim Baruti,
Here.
Meg Bomke,
Here.
Monica Gary, Crystal Vanucci,
Here.
Chris Yakubowski,
Here.
Lori Hayes,
Here.
Jacob Lane,
Here.
Marcy Parker, Michelle Shropshire, Susan Gardner, here, Stephen Haynes, Jamie Jackson, Laura Sellers, Todd Horsley,
Here.
David Brown, Daryl English, Tom Cohn,
Here.
Kevin Marshall, Kathy Bender. Went down through the voting.
Oh, she's here.
Yeah, Kathy Bender is
I don't think I just
down
saw
over
her.
there.
Okay, out of earshot.
She's social distancing.
Okay, great. Kevin Marshall, Deborah Frazier, Tim McLaughlin, David Ross, Joe Stainsby, Ivan Rucker, Tanya Holland, Craig Reed, Adam Lynch, Matthew Rowe. I believe that's the end of our voting members, and then some.
Yes.
I think you have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Ms. Golden.
Wrong one.
This time, looking for a motion for approval of the February 27th, 23 Policy Committee agenda as amended. Please note we do have a front and a back to the agenda.
You need to read that out because the agenda that was emailed
Okay.
did not have the amendment.
All right. Happy to do so.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make an amendment to the agenda with item 12, 13, and 14 regarding closed session, reading into closed session, returning to open session, and opining to closed meeting discussion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to public involvement. Comments and questions from members of the public are welcome at this time. Staff will also read comments submitted by the public prior to the meeting. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in person? Please. Yes, please.
Okay, my name is Dennis Ashman. I filed written comments in January and comments a little bit, number one, by saying that I recognize that this proposal would seek to solve an interstate traffic problem. Solve that interstate traffic problem by making amendments to local traffic and possibly affecting local residents. Let me identify a couple of problems that I can think of. Well, one is that this proposal would route the interstate traffic through the Celebrate Virginia residential neighborhood, and that might be and have an adverse impact on that residential neighborhood. Two, might just be moving from one location on Route 17 to another location. Now, the eastbound traffic on 17 backs up at I-95 and backs up some mile or 2 miles. You may just be moving this to a place where that traffic would be starting at the section of the Celebrate Parkway. So you would just move problems as a result. Think of a couple of ways that you might be able to address the interstate traffic congestion issue. Number one is that recognize that it is interstate traffic, that is traffic that diverts at Hayhurst or at Frederick, Maryland, to avoid going around the Capitol Beltway and comes down Route 15, Route 17 to I-95 and goes south on vice versa. So recognize that, do something to allow that interstate traffic to move all the way down around to I-95 instead of going through Fredericksburg. You could make Route 15 interstate highway, you would have to upgrade it and then construct an interstate highway from Culver to I-95. Would be a big project and goes outside of your jurisdiction, and I realize that would mean that you would need to coordinate things with jurisdictions. But it seems to me like it could. Second resolution that I can think of is that if you didn't want to do what I just now described, you could build an elevated highway of Route 17, starting at, say, Poplar Road and going to I-95, so that you would have an upper level freeway that would allow all the interstate traffic to use that upper level freeway and get on I-95 without causing any of the traffic congestion problems that you're currently seeing at the junction of Route 17, Route I-95. That would be expensive too, I realize. It would be a resolution if you any doubts as to whether that can be done. Look at what used to be the Embarcadero in San Francisco. It's exactly that same thing. Intersection of I-95 and Route 826 in Miami, the mixing bowl in the district, all of those were elevated. If you did either one of those resolutions, that would allow you to solve your interstate traffic problem and still allow the local traffic to maintain what it currently is doing, and would allow you to build a river crossing at that point that would allow local traffic to use the river crossing and thereby, alleviate some of the traffic problems that one has when there's a problem.
Excuse me, Mr. Eichman, your time
All
is
right.
not up.
Thank you very much for your comments, sir. Anyone else who wishes to speak?
Yes, Mr. Chair, my name is Joe Bonds. I'm a resident of the Celebrate area, and just to apologize for Ann Larkin, I'm on a committee there that's been looking into this issue, and Fran is here. And unfortunately, she is out of town and can't be here tonight. Let me start off my comments with saying that it's difficult for us to comment to you tonight because we feel that the plan is inadequate. And let me state why. We had a meeting out to celebrate the 4th of January. Mr. Ollis was there, told us that the Celebrate Parkway was just a placeholder, that there are a number of alternatives being looked into that. So at the last policy committee meeting, Mr. Ollis talked about that there is an in-house committee or a local committee looking at alternatives. And then since then, the document itself has been changed, and it's where the road shows for Celebrate Parkway, it says that's just a placeholder. Well, none of us know, us being the public, know what are we talking about? What are those alternatives? What's been chosen? So you have an incomplete plan. And how can you approve the, pass a resolution tonight with an incomplete plan? So at least it's something that I think that the public should be able to see those alternatives and have an opportunity to comment on. So with that, we are in favor of the document, but again, it's an incomplete document. So we would ask if you do anything tonight that you approve this, but maybe a caveat or defer the section 17 where it's in the plan where it talks about the new bridge and the interchange, and defer that to at a later date. So with that in mind, I'd ask you, or just comment, if you look at the data in your plan, building a new bridge and building the interchange is going to reduce traffic on 17 by 15%. 15%. So if you do the math, that's around 5,000 to 5,500 cars. But the cost for that is $500 to $750 million. $750 million. So my question to you is that the best use of $750 million to reduce traffic, 5,500 cars a year? Can we not do something better with that tremendous amount of money? The other thing is in the paper today, it talks about not Spotsylvania, Stafford County approved a bond issue for $50,000, for $50 million. I mean, that's one tenth of the cost it would take to build just two components of this plan. And that's not adding up all of the other parts of the plan. That's just.
Excuse me, Mr. Vaughn, your time is up.
So again, I ask you just to defer the information. Parkway or the bridge and interchange.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any other members of the public who would like to speak at this time? Do we have any members of the public online who would like to speak at this time? Do we have any comments submitted in writing? All right, then we will close public involvement for this evening. Moving on to the, oh,
This is
excuse me?
Coley. Hi, hello. Just wanted to let you know that Becky should have linked the correspondence from Jane Leeds and for public comment, and I believe it's at the end of the agenda. Just letting you know. Thank you.
Thank you. That would be great.
Scroll down to correspondence.
There you go.
Great.
So it was sent out with the agenda under correspondence, I believe, so you should have it in your pack. We're happy to read it if you would like. Or if
I
you
think
wanna-
she has I think the writer has the right for the comments to be read aloud during the meeting.
I'd happily do that for you.
You want me to do it from down here?
Sure.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Jane Leeds. I'm a public advocate for those whom are physically and financially challenged of Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania County. I've tried to broach the issue of promoting the future planning of a light rail system. So far, I only hear the oft-used comment that there's no funding for that. In my humble opinion, that is untrue. The various committee meetings I have attended and produced materials for them to read has not been read or considered. How can one reasonably say it's too expensive without reading the data and successful efforts achieved by other small cities? The use of light rail systems in high-density areas has significantly lessened congestion, the need for parking, and increased better use of resources, particularly for businesses. It's also less polluting, affordable to riders, more accessible, and safer for disabled passengers to use. With the arrival in the next decade of autonomous drivers of rail vehicles, the cost of operations for such a system will be less expensive, as the cost of hiring, payroll, and benefits for human drivers will no longer be the largest portion of the budget. Funding from the federal government is not always the only source for creating a light rail system. Other cities have done so on their own. See the link listed below. My biggest concern is more immediate. The developers and planners are still not providing good transportation planning locally, only for commuters on I-95. With the opening next year, the new Veterans Administration and government clinics were woefully unprepared. Red Transit is not safely accessible, reliable, or has adequate equipment to transport our veterans, the disabled, and the low-paid workers who can't afford a vehicle to go there. Recruiting for jobs will be a problem as Fred is not reliable or has a schedule that will accommodate their needs. Not all jobs or clinical visits, especially emergencies, fit Fred's limited schedules. Weekends, holidays, and evening visits jobs are not achievable using Fred Transit or mobility options. There are some transportation venues like Lyft and Uber, but generally they are too expensive for daily or frequent use by those whom are financially challenged. Many veterans are in the latter category. Medicaid and Medicare programs provide some access, but not everyone qualifies for those programs. Our area is facing a serious public black eye in not providing safe, reliable, and accessible transportation for our disabled veterans. The destination at the facilities are equipped to handle them, but their point of origin is seriously lacking. The obvious lack of contiguous sidewalks prevents riders, wheelchair, from safely accessing bus stops, Amtrak, or the VRE. For those who are ambulatory with guide dogs, there are no audible signals to help them safely cross streets and intersections.
Thank you, Ms. Golden. All right, do we have any other written comments from the public? All right,
That's it.
thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda.
Just a comment from staff, Mr. Chair, on the consent agenda. The minutes contained one error, which Ms. Baumke pointed out to us. We've corrected it. The agenda the minutes refer to the I-96 in one point and not the I-95. So we have corrected that item in the minutes. The GWRC FAMPO MOU, we're not asking you to dig deep into it today, but we have to every February bring it to the attention of the policy committee. And if you would like us to consider amendments or to ask GWRC to consider amendments, please, if you could let us know, we will gladly help with drafting and consider amendments. The third item is just the item you approved at your last meeting, but we've had to add some transit projects to the list. So we're just going through the motions a second time. You've seen this all at the last meeting, sans the transit projects which we've added.
Thank you.
Consent agenda as submitted.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. Excuse me. Before we hold a vote, I want to thank Ms. Baumke for her excellent handling of the meeting in January during my illness. Thank you very much for your work there. At this time, we do have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. Thank you. All right, at this time, FAMPO Administrator Report. Mr. Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you pull that up for me. There we go. Oh, I'm going to stand on this side because it's big head out of the way. Our report for February, next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to look at the grant that's been awarded to us, some issues with regards to freight safety and our long-term congestion vision. Next slide. Great news, which those of you at the GWRC meeting will already know. We have been awarded the grant to develop the Safe Streets for All action plan. And this is a federal grant with a small amount of local match funds. And we were just notified, it's in your pack, that we have been awarded this grant. Next slide. We think it's great news. It's going to provide us the opportunity to investigate safety in our region and find the dangerous hotspots, develop a plan to remedy those. A contract is going to be signed between us in the person of the Executive Director of GWRC and the Federal Highway Administration, actually the Federal Department of Transportation. The grant has a small local match, which you all know about because we came to you some months back when we were considering applying for this grant and gave you that breakdown. The action plan will be used then by localities to apply for funding in the same grant program to construct the infrastructure and the programs to improve safety, transportation safety in our region. And we will need to appoint a consultant for much of the work. The first part of this project really is being done for us by VDOT, and we're very grateful for that. VDOT Central Office is doing the research into safety, crashes, problems, high incidences of things like road departures, injuries, deaths, and so on our roads, sidewalks, and bicycle paths, and so on. And we will then work with our localities to develop the best safety projects that need to be funded in those hotspots. So we're going to be working with the staff from your jurisdictions and with a consultant to develop a plan to fix those problems in those hotspots. Next slide. What can you do with the money? Once we've got a plan in place, each jurisdiction, and we can support with assistance from our side, can apply for funding for projects. So what type of projects are envisaged? I'm going to fly through these really quickly, but I've just highlighted a few so you understand what's involved here. So things like left and right turn lanes at intersections, rumble strips, better signage, this kind of thing. This is the only one we're not sure about because it says low cost. So we're not actually sure if it means physically building, 50 right and left turn lanes from scratch or whether it's changing markings on road surfaces. We'll find that out for you. Lighting or in various trouble hotspots. Developing the complete streets to separate road users. You don't want people on bicycles, pedestrians, and cars and trucks all in the same area on the same surface because it's dangerous. Closing network gaps within sidewalks. This should give just about every supervisor and city council member a sense of excitement. We can apply for funding in the same grant to close these gaps in your sidewalks all over the region. Audible pedestrian signals for people walking, rolling, or using mobility assisted devices. You heard Jane Leeds' letter earlier asking for things like this. Here, there is a pot of funding which we can use to construct those kinds of things to implement audible signals, etc. Next slide. Developing bike networks and bicycle lanes, road calming, design changes, addressing speed along key corridors through infrastructure, safety cameras. We can improve safe routes to school with multiple activities. There's a lot of detail in this particular one, which I won't have time to go into now. Data collection, there's the funding to get better data collection on problem hotspots. Shoulder widening. Many of our rural roads need rehabilitation of shoulders and widening of shoulders. That can be funded through this particular project. Next slide. Freight safety. Many of you might have seen this article in the Freelance Star, big crashes on the rise. So here are the statistics that they showed in that particular article, and I just thought I'd draw your attention to it. You can see the statewide figures and the local figures for our region over various years. We've gone from 143 per year to 183 per year for big truck and commercial vehicle crashes. It's on the increase. And deaths, locally, we've gone from 0, we're getting 4 or 5 a year. And if you look across the state, that's kind of what the state figures. They are getting worse, and we do need to think about road safety in our region. Next slide. Our congestion vision. Sometimes I think people don't realize that and I'm working with the chairs of FAMPO, I don't think people always realize that there's some logic to what we're doing. We don't just bumble on from meeting to a meeting, drop an agenda, have a meeting, write minutes, go home, start again, right? There's some logic, there's some thought behind this, and here's what we're trying to do. So we had the presentation by the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority last month. Tonight, you're going to have a presentation by the Department of Rail and Public Transportation and OmniRide, talking about what bus transit is going to be available in future, rail transit, and so on. In March, we're preparing to have, instead of a regular FAMPO policy committee meeting like this, to have a workshop, same time, same place, same everything. The actual policy committee meeting will be kept very short to like 2 quick items, but most of the times will be dedicated to a workshop for you all to discuss what plans we should make in future to deal with congestion. And we have a facilitator who's an expert in transportation planning to come and facilitate that workshop to get you all thinking, a bit of creative juices going. Do we want to spend all the money on widening roads? Do we need to build new roads? Do we need to provide more transit services? Do we need to think about land use? Where do we put apartments, condos, shared townhomes? The way you cluster those, the way you build multi-use buildings and districts impacts congestion. So thinking through that and deciding what you want to do long term about that, we're going to do that through a workshop in March. In April, I'd like to then revisit what we've been working on for a while, which is a FAMPO vision to look at high-level future concepts. Having had the presentations, having done the workshop, where do you want to go with this? What is it that FAMPO wants to encourage or discourage in the future? And then talk about funding in May. So there's some logic to that. How do we fund the vision, right? what should the vision be to deal with congestion and related matters, design that in some high level points, and then discuss how to fund it. So it's just so you understand where we're going. We're not blundering around in the dark. There's some logical progression here. Next slide. Accessibility. We've had a number of comments, letters, emails, phone calls, local nonprofits, disabled residents, like you heard this evening, regarding the accommodations for disabled residents in our transportation system. So there are at least 3 things we can do as FAMPO. As you know, FAMPO doesn't construct anything. If we ever tried, I think VDOT would want to murderize us. All right, we don't construct anything, but what can we do? Well, we can amend our long-range transportation plan to include some of these considerations that we've been asked about, mobility challenges, hearing impairments, what can we do about folks that have disabilities? Also, we can identify key safety interventions in this Safe Streets for All grant program that I was just talking about a minute ago. And we can build in some solutions and we can get those solutions funded. And thirdly, we can ask localities and state partners to indicate what accommodations are included in their funding applications that we support or that we approve. People apply for CMAQ and STGB funding from us. That's congestion management and air quality funding and surface transportation block grant funding. One of the things we can do is say, well, have you thought of people with challenges? How have you built that into this project that you're constructing? What many of you already know is that VDOT and federal highway standards now require that all of our projects are accessible when they're built new. But these are some of the things that we can do to answer some of those questions. And Mr. Kelly, you'll know that when you ask us, do we respond to the public when they bring us their complaints? Well, here are some things we can do to respond to specific complaints we've heard recently. We can address. Staff are preparing the new financial year 24 budget and the UPWP, that's the Unified Planning Work Program. That's our business plan as FAMPO. What do we do? We're busy preparing the new ones. DRPT and VDOT have indicated that our funding for FY24 is going to increase again. So we're very happy with that. It will help us to run the office, pay for the rent, pay staff salaries and all that kind of thing. We are waiting for the allocations for FY29 for the CMAQ and STGB funds. We don't yet know how much we're going to be allocated, but you will see in the next few months as we give you the scoring for our projects and then how much money we've got and then the allocations we make, you'll need to approve those. It's the purview of the policy committee ultimately to decide how we spend the money, hopefully with staff's technical input. There is a possibility that, and we don't know this yet, there's a possibility that the CTB may approve additional funding for our existing CMAQ and SDG projects. Normally what we do is first fund the existing projects so that we can get them into construction, and then we fund the new projects. Well, there is the possibility that some, don't know what percentage of our projects may be funded because they have additional funding at the state level, and we also waiting to hear whether or not that will happen. So we'll bring you responses as we get them. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. That's all I have for you tonight. I'm keeping it short. I know you have a long night tonight.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the report. Moving on to the action and discussion items. Item 8A is the election of Policy Committee second vice chair. This member is from Spotsylvania County, so we ask that our friends from Spotsylvania put forth a nomination.
I nominate Lori.
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Congratulations, Ms. Hayes.
Thank you.
All right, item 8. Yes. Condolences? Yeah. All right, item 8B, transit options for the FAMPO region to address the growing congestion crisis. First, from the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, Mr. Todd Horsley.
Thank you for coming, Todd. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
Never mind. Carry on with the detail.
Did you steer clear?
You know, I'm a big children. But carry on.
Love to work from home, but it's hard on my eyes over the last 2 years. I'm about as large a head as. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Todd Horsley. I'm the director of Northern Virginia Transit Programs. Very long title. And I work in DRPT at Northern Virginia office in Alexandria, and we provide support for transit providers in this region from that office. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what DRPT does and the programs that it provides. So DRPT's role in transportation, we were created in 1992, so we just celebrated our 30th anniversary. DRPT prior to 1992 was a section of VDOT, and here is basically why you see why we were created as a separate department along with our mission and our values, or our mission and our vision. Virginia is somewhat unique in the nation. We're one of the few states who actually has a state department or entity specifically dedicated to public transportation and rail, separate from the State Department of Transportation. DRPT has about 60 employees, and our two offices are about 50, and our about 10, or the rest of our employees are in our Northern Virginia office in Alexandria, where I work. Other than our focus on rail and public transportation and our much smaller size than VDOT, we refer to them as our big sister. They refer to us as their little sister. The primary difference between how DRPT operates as opposed to VDOT is that DRPT is primarily a funding and a coordination agency. DRPT provides funding, technical assistance, oversight, and other support and coordination to our funding partners, recipients. We do conduct studies and plans as needed, and directed. We provide state safety oversight to the light rail system in Norfolk. We are responsible for statewide rail planning. But like Ian said about FAMPO, we don't build anything, and we don't maintain any assets, with one exception, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. We don't actually operate any service. So here's a summary of the rail and public transportation systems and programs that we support in the Commonwealth. Fredericksburg Regional Transit, OmniRide, and VRE are the transit systems that we support in the GWRC region. Metro in the DC area is also one of these 40 transit systems that's listed on, or that's referenced on this slide. We also support FAMPO and GW Ride Connect through GWRC, as well as the Rappahannock Area Agency on Aging and the Rappahannock Area Community Services Board in this region. Obviously, Amtrak and CSX also operate in this region. So along with a couple of other funding sources that are dedicated specifically to Metro, DRPT primarily manages funding in the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund and the Commonwealth Rail Fund. And they comprise about 30.5% of the Transportation Trust Fund. So in FY23, the mass transit and rail funds totaled approximately $672 million. And after adding the approximately $204 million in other dedicated Metro funding, DRPT is managing approximately $876 million in FY23. And almost all of that is awarded in grants or funding agreements to our funding recipients. So here's the summary of the revenues for rail and public transportation over the last 5 years in the Commonwealth. You can see the creation of the VPRA in FY21, that's in the purple. And you can see the corresponding kind of reduction in DRPT rail funding after, that's in the dark green. You can also see the increases in transit revenues from federal relief funding in FY22 and FY23. And also some state uplift funding. And we expect these levels of transit funding to actually level back off in FY24 and beyond. So kind of conversely, here's a summary of the corresponding expenditures for rail and public transportation between FY19 and 23, which you can see almost exactly mirror the revenues seen on that previous slide. So the RPT 6-year improvement program, or SIP, for FY 23 through 28, or FY 28 totals $6.2 billion. We're currently hard at work on our FY 24 SIP, which will be presented to the Commonwealth Transportation Board in April. That'll be followed by public hearings in late April and May, and then ending with a SIP approval by the CTB in June. So DRPT's FY 24 grant awards would then be available for funding recipient use on July 1st. And our SIP is actually posted on our data portal. And there's actually a link and a QR code to the open data portal right here. So our funding programs, DRPT awards transit funding to local recipients after evaluating grant applications through our prioritization program. Transit. DRPT solicits grant applications each year, which are due by February 1st. Funding awards are then recommended in our SIP, which is made available in April and approved by the CTB in June. DRPT awards operating assistance each year to transit systems based on a formula that is 100% performance-based. Operating formula, or our operating assistance. We then solicit applications for capital projects and evaluate those through a prioritization process that prioritizes state of good repair or fix it first projects. We also allow for, the program also has some funding for some expansion programs as well. So what we call our special programs include funding for technical assistance, which this is kind of like studies and plans. I believe the East-West ability study here was a technical assistance grant. Demonstration projects for like pilot and innovation projects, workforce development grants for internships and apprenticeships, and then so funding for transportation demand projects for Connect. We also control some state funding sources that are allocated to Virginia, and we make awards in accordance with the purpose and guidelines of those awards. And again, all this is available. So in this region, here's a summary of the state transit assistance we have with the GWR region in FY23. So in addition to our annual award for operating assistance, we provided capital funding to Fredericksburg Regional Transit for replacement buses, surveillance and security equipment, and more automated passenger carriers. D is providing 16% of the total cost of those capital projects to match 80% federal funding and 4% local funding. Providing 50% state funding toward the cost of a new transit strategic plan, which is a statutory requirement. And then we're also provides funding to GWRC, including funding for the GW Connect programs and a 10% match to FTA 5303 planning grants for implementation of FAMPO UPWP, as Ian just talked about a minute ago. So we also provided capital assistance in FY23 to both the Rappahannock Area Agency on Aging and the Rappahannock Area Community Services Board for new vehicles. Healthy Generations also receives state funding for their operations and mobility management programs. So looking ahead, much of our funding, or DRPT's transit funding, is application based. So future non-operating funding for transit projects in the GWRC region will depend on the capital and other applications submitted for consideration by Fredericksburg Regional Transit. As noted, we do prioritize state of good repair in our capital program. So those types of projects will always continue to score well. And while our capital program can support some expansion projects each year, it's able to do so when state funds are leveraged against other funds in this region that probably need federal funds. So I can tell you about future funding sources in this region. First is funding for 3 new commuter bus routes between this region and Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia that will become operational after the current express lanes were extended. I believe Bob is probably planning to tell you a little bit more about these in a minute, so I'll let him give you more details. But the funding source for these is the Interstate Operations Enhancement Program that was established a couple of years ago in conjunction with the creation of the revenue streams that primarily benefit the I-81. So DRPT will award these funds directly to OmniRide for these new transit routes. There's also a capital funding recommendation in the Smart Scale Round 5 recommended funding scenario that is being considered by the CTB to support new express commuter bus service by Fredericksburg Regional Transit between Fredericksburg and the Dahlgren. They will support facilities. Smart Scale Round 5 is programming funding for FY 28 and 29, but there may be opportunities to advance that funding to an earlier year. So I just wanted to throw this slide in because I know that many of your residents that travel into Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia also utilize Metro. So I just added this slide to kind of illustrate the scale of the Commonwealth's financial commitment. Of the total average annual $2.5 billion subsidy required by Metro, Virginia generally contributes around 23% of that, with the Commonwealth providing 14%, and then the local jurisdictions in Northern Virginia, who are all members of NVTC, they generally provide about 9% of that. And with the opening of the 6 new Silver Line stations late last year, the actual the Virginia share of this will probably increase from 23%, and the rest of it will go down a little bit, but not really sure how much that'll be at this point. So earlier I noted that there is one exception, that DRPT does operate one service, and that is the Virginia Breeze. The Virginia Breeze is an intercity bus service that connects underserved communities, that's mainly rural communities, the national bus and passenger rail network. Virginia Breeze is operated through a contract with Dillon's Bus Service, which is owned by Coach USA. The Megabus actually does the ticketing for the Virginia Breeze service. There are currently 4 Virginia Breeze routes, all of which originate in either Southwest Virginia or Southside Virginia, and all terminate at Union Station in Washington, D.C. We provide connections to Dulles International Airport and to Metro at the West Falls Church Station. One of these routes, the Capital Connector, Martinsville and Richmond, D.C., it travels through this region, but it doesn't stop. It's actually an express service from Richmond to Washington, D.C. on its final leg. The reason I even included this slide in here is because even though we do have 4 routes right now, we have studied a 5th route. And the potential fifth route that has been studied and would be the most likely candidate for new service is actually a route between the Hampton Roads region and Washington, D.C., utilizing Route 17, including a stop in Fredericksburg. So probably also serving Gloucester. And this type of service is really meant for underserved and rural. I will say though, the study at this time did not show a really mature market for this service. So there's no current plans to initiate it, but we'll continue to evaluate it as time goes on and as travel patterns continue to evolve. So just wrapping up here, I know that DJ Stadler did a presentation for you guys last month. So my last few slides, they focus on rail, but since he gave you that update last month and you hosted a rail summit September or October of last year, primarily just going to include, I've just primarily included these slides for reference for you. As DJ told you last month, while DRPT maintains responsibility for the freight and rail planning statewide, all other passenger rail responsibilities vested in BPRA, and DRPT has responsibility for all freight rail programs. And I'm just going to click through these remaining slides without comment, other than to say that they summarize DRPT's mission with regard to freight rail, funding programs with regard to freight rail, accomplishments of our freight rail program since 2017. And with that, I'm going to basically turn this presentation over to Bob. That's my contact information, but contact information for Amy Garbarini. She's our Northern Virginia planning manager. She actually acts more FAMPO than I do on a daily basis. So you may see Amy sometimes, and that's obviously our two.
We have a question. Todd, bigger picture. In the very beginning of the presentation, you mentioned with regards to funding for DRPT and system that you noted the federal funds and everything we got during COVID, and that things will begin to taper off going forward. VDOT has said transit is the way of the future. We can't build our way out of congestion. You're making these presentations, Bob's making his presentations, because we want to have a robust discussion on how we are going to expand transit and commuter bus service potentially in our region. So my first question is, when we start talking about expansion, and I know a lot of localities are talking about expansion, and you're saying the budget's starting to taper off, what is the long-term view with regard to transit funding? That's one. And two, there's transit and then there's commuter. And there's a bit of a difference. We ran into this problem with a few years ago with the funding, where I've got bus systems in communities that were moving college kids that got a huge boost, and our commuter bus system got kicked in the butt, yet we got held harmless. Is there anything being done in recognizing more of the need in this region specifically for commuter as well as transit? So two questions. What are we doing with the transit versus, or just local bus service versus commuter bus service? And what are we doing with funding if we want to talk about expanding our services?
Sure. So I think I talked about in 22 and 23, we saw some state uplift funding that was also kind of added to the COVID relief money that the federal government gave out. So obviously going forward, there's new federal money in the IJAA, or the acronym is the new federal infrastructure programs. I think that's so that'll be an increase in federal funding. We are actively encouraging our transit systems to apply for all the federal funding you can get if you're eligible for it, and then we will, we'll help you write those grant applications, and we'll to incentivize some of those grant applications. We're actually, offering a larger state match and a lower local match. So the funding wise, there's going to be additional federal money involved. There was some state uplift money in FY 22 and 23, like I said. We expect that to go back down. We don't know that it's going to go back down to where it was in 2021. Revenues are still coming in strong right now for the Commonwealth, but there's no guarantee of that in the future. So that's just what we're seeing right now as far as state and federal funding going forward. So obviously we will. I think I said that in FY 23 we got over $800 million. We basically sent all of that out, just a very, very little bit retained for administrative purposes. We basically send nearly all of that out to our grantees. So we're very good about getting funding out to our grantees if they, whatever's provided to us, but that has to be provided to us by the General Assembly or by others. Your second question was about
we had a little bump in the road with regards to commuter bus service versus standard.
Round one of merit.
Yeah. Is there anything been done on that front and recognizing, especially up here, commuter buses for us are critical, and yet we got, and I know it had nothing to do with you all, that was a legislative thing.
Sure, we've made some tweaks to our operating formula to account for some of the discrepancies that, the differences between commuter bus operations and local bus operations, and we'll continue to do that. I think VRE, there's some legislation in the that's going through the General Assembly now. I think it's actually made it out of the General Assembly and it's going to the governor's desk. It will actually take VRE out of the operating formula and set that aside. So VRE was previously in the operating formula and competing with all of our other transit systems. So hopefully that will help as well. I think we've talked about the IOEP funding, that will help support some of these new bus services out of this region. That's not, I don't think that's long-term funding. That'll provide funding for several years to get those operations going. But there's some programs like that. I would encourage this region to continue to look at I-95, 395 commuter choice funding for some startup funding for commuter bus as well.
If you could give us a recommendation moving forward, what we should be first thing we should be doing, what would it be? Looking at transit and expanding transit in our region, what would your recommendation be for us to be first step?
It depends on really what you want to do. And I think there are two markets here. There's obviously the commuter market that OmniRide and VRE serve. So there's funding available for that. And then there's also, Fredericksburg Regional Transit. Right now, it seems to be more confined to the city of Fredericksburg. If somebody here about to speak to that, so
We're currently working, I'm Melody Fowler, I'm the new deputy director for Fredericksburg Regional Transit, so it's nice to meet everyone. And so we're actually currently working on our transit strategic plan, and so we are looking at routes, and we're currently in Fredericksburg, Stafford, and in Spotsylvania County. You know, with our new plan, we're looking at, this is a 10-year plan, and it's going to look at routes to see if we need to make any changes to our current routes. We're looking at our vehicles, our facility, and also our current funding plan. So all this should look at the transportation strategic plan. We're also currently in the process of getting new buses in. Our new buses that we are getting in now, before they have the list, they now have the ramp. So this is really helping our veterans and other people that need additional services. So this is a great new feature to our new buses. And so I had to comment on that.
Yeah, the TSP is a statutorily required as of years ago, and but all of our transit agencies have always had to do a transit development plan. This is just taking it a little bit further, looking a little bit more strategically. So anyway, again, DRPT not being an implementing agency, we're a funding agency. We support, we're working hand in hand with this TSP with Fredericksburg Regional Transit. We'll support, to the extent possible with the resources we're allotted to, we'll support them.
Thank you so much.
Really, that's a regional decision. It's, about what the region wants to do as far as transit goes.
Fix congestion.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate the presentation. All right, now OmniRide, Dr. Schneider.
I would say thank you for coming, but he has to come every month, so I'm not going to say thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Yep. Okay, I come from a different perspective. We don't operate service here, so I'm here to tell you that your baby's coming. So, I'm not the transit baby, by the way. I just wanted to give you a mass transit perspective on what is happening with congestion in I-95. Big picture, and then if we want to give some examples, some of the public comments tonight, very interesting in that you're talking about a parkway and not putting major traffic down what is literally named a parkway. It's a perspective on development and growth, cul-de-sacs, all of those things. Let's dive right in. I grew up 2 lefts and 2 rights from here, 830 miles away. How does someone do that? They grew up right here in Melbourne, Florida, right on I-95. My entire childhood was driving from, actually I was born down here in Fort Lauderdale, driving from here to Baltimore. Christmas, birthdays, Easters, anniversaries, it's the American Autobahn. We joked about it, we teased about it all the way back in the 90s. You have chosen to build and develop a community on the American Autobahn. You have chosen, as a Floridian, I can attest to the New Yorkers, New Jerseyans, Pennsylvanians, Connecticut, Quebecois, all traveling up and down I-95. You see the license plates as you travel, you know they're there. This is not something unique. You're also talking about Richmond and Washington, D.C. are really only, what, 2 hours apart? That's nothing. That's nothing. So you're really extending what is Philadelphia to Richmond, 1 megalopolis. And you are sitting in the bottom quartile. So that is your single biggest challenge is you are on, never mind, 85 at Petersburg, is that right? I-85?
80,
Yeah. So I mean, how many other 40 crosses in here? I lived in Knoxville. I know 40, right? My mom and dad live in Asheville. I know how to get there. Straight down 95. So all of those things connect. Atlanta, how do you get to Atlanta? You can go 81, but it's actually faster to go 95 to 20 across South Carolina, and you're there. You have a fundamental problem in which you are built in and around I-95. And your networks have 3 purposes. Travel, which we just talked about. Commuting, which is getting the heck out of here to get somewhere else as quickly as possible, to earn an income, earn a living, etc., but also local. And that's where a lot of the frustration comes in. We hear over and over, what about the commuter stuff? We could talk about that. the local angst. When I was looking at where to live, I originally wanted to live in Montclair. Then I moved here early and experienced I-95. I live near Haymarket. I made a choice. I recognize where I would be landlocked, and as someone who studies things and realized, oh, I have a waterway and historic seaboard into towns like Fredericksburg and the Marine Corps. There are two immovable forces. It's kind of like where I am. You might have Manassas and literally a battlefield. You're not moving the battlefield. So you are landlocked in certain areas. So when you factor in, there are multi-purpose neighborhoods. We're shoving in a ton of retail, a ton of residential, as much as we can pack into these land units. And each developer has their own philosophy. Each developer has their own approach. Some are, I am just building houses, and I will build them as many units as I can cram into this dirt as humanly possible. Others, now I want some mixed use and I want to be close to transit options. I want to do some cool stuff. Others say, no, I'm very happy having high churn because of the Marine Corps base, and I can just turn apartment units and I'm here for rental, right? No one sets down roots in those areas. They're here, they're deployed, their family lives there. The second they're out of here, they're out of here, right? So they never develop the long-term travel patterns of a true commuter. They just drive everywhere they need to go because that's where Google Maps tells them. We talked about the construction or the accidents and congestion. I-95 today at 9:14 this morning, there was an accident in Spotsylvania County. Shut down the interstate. Beautiful picture on Inside Node if you want to take a look. And the great line is all traffic was diverted. Those are your only two options. Those are your only two options. No matter what you do, no matter where you want to go, you're trapped. And those are your only ways to get around, just because there are only so many ways to get across the water. Land use. Here's Central Park Plaza. If I want to get from here to there, I can't get there from here to there unless I drive. Frequently, when you just, for fun, next time you go to the grocery store, look at where the road is and where the store is. It's often a 800-foot walk. Something, so you're talking 3 to 4 football fields to get to the front entrance of a store. There's no sidewalks, there's no availability. What if it's raining? What if it's whatever? My favorite is there's a Wawa right next to a restaurant. And I needed gas and I needed to go to the restaurant. I figured, oh, this is easy. I'll get gas at the Wawa Park and I will walk to right there. I could literally see the entrance. I could not get there from here because they had literally built a fence to prevent me from walking between two buildings because every property owner sees it as their fiefdom and they don't want anyone walking through the bushes or up sidewalks. It's a huge issue, and it's a common thing that you see as you look at your development. You will see everything cut, carved, and designed to be driven, not walked, which means every time you want to go somewhere, you have to drive from here to here to here. But to go from the Wegmans to the Walmart should be walkable. They should be sharing the same parking lot, but they're not. They are separated by how many square miles of asphalt, in essence, and that is a development problem. It's, so you can't plug in transit because I'm sitting in the same traffic. I'm trapped. Customers are looking out the window at cars going faster because they're cutting our buses off. We're having to stop for people. It's just difficult, and they're extremely passenger unfriendly. I can't tell you the number of times that our passengers, we call them goat paths. Have you heard that phrase before? Those are those trails along the sides of roads. Our customers are the ones that create the goat paths because they're walking from the bus stop to where they work. Not to where they shop, because typically they're shopping right by their apartment. This is where they're trying to get access. This is a great example of how we build subdivisions. By the way, this is fantastic if you never leave your neighborhood, right? Because the road's out here. Well, if you want to get over here, how do you get there? Well, let's walk. Fence? Anyone have fences? Yeah. Or tree lines or ditches. There's a great example about a quarter mile from our facility in Woodbridge. There's a neighborhood that is right next to Mom's Organic Market. They can see the back of Mom's Organic Market from their house. They can't get there. They have to walk the equivalent of all the way out down Dale Boulevard, all the way down Gideon just to get into Mom's Organic Market. It's a 1.6 mile walk for something that is less than a football field away. That's development zoning and the effort to try to connect neighborhoods. This should be a grid. There should be sidewalks, but we get mad when children play in our yard in modern America. So we have this, again, fiefdom that also shows up inside our own neighborhoods. Transit can't work through here. We can't drive down, make a cul-de-sac turnaround, drive down here, turn around, drive over, loop through the whole neighborhood. But if there was one road, we could split the road and everyone could walk to it. That's why school buses have this problem. That's why your kids are up 90 minutes before school to get on the school bus. School buses are having to drag themselves through all the cul-de-sacs, pick up for little babies. I had 2 of them. But when school starts at 8:30 and the kids have to be on the bus at 6:15, we have a fundamental disconnect in how we move children. So what parent does that? Those with no other options. I drop my kids off at school. I created congestion because our road network got in the way of smart mobility and therefore created the very congestion that the cheese wagon is designed to avoid. At what point? So it was the once we know, then we understand. That's what we're chasing. That's the dream. Come home, it's time with your kids. That's what OmniRide sells, right? We're getting you out of traffic, out of congestion. We get you down the interstate. But locally, you have this. And by the way, Prince William has this. Fairfax has this. Loudoun has this. Everyone has this. Any town in America has this. We just have it in some areas much worse. When I travel to get here, Route 17, I go down out of the Haymarket area, straight down 29. I've got a ton of traffic lights for no reason other than they built a road there 50 years ago and you have to cross it. No one's willing to seal off the intersection anymore just to keep traffic moving. But then I connect in with 17 and I cross 17 and I have 3 traffic lights and then 30 miles of pasture. And then I show up into this when I approach Stafford. And it's because we jammed all that development into one concrete area, which we say is density, but it's not mixed use density. It's not life that can be contained on a weekend within a very compact space. Housing's over there, retail's over there, jobs are over there, anything historic's over there, and there's a river between us, good luck. And that's the dilemma that you as a community will continuously face in this specific corridor. DC has this problem, right? Historic Manassas has this problem. So it's not unique, but this is your area, so I'm speaking to you. So what we do is we try to create options to ease commuting stress. FredEx is coming, we have the OmniRide service, we have VRE. These are things that are very, very, very aware. But are you doing the things that would reduce congestion and reduce trips by bundling your zoning or bundling your development? So are you putting, everyone says, oh, mixed use, mixed use, mixed use. But what are the incentives are you creating to live there? What are the things you're doing to provide access to transportation? Or if you don't have the service, you can't build the building. So the mixed use doesn't exist. It's a pretend mixed use. It's kind of like the Wegmans that has the upstairs, but no one really eats up there. It's just more for public meetings, right? I mean, it's a facade. It looks like it's Mediterranean, but it's not. It's just an extra space. But if you actually had a lot of development activity happening, if that Wegmans was actually right next to a library with a joint community space, you're using your land, your buildings, your infrastructure in a smarter and different way. So we're doing it right now in Eastern Prince William County. We've taken a really good hard look. We've been waylaid by the pandemic. So we're about 2 years behind of where we want to be, but our emphasis is shorter routes, multiple transfer hubs. No one likes to transfer, but if you have to, make it count. So we recognize that shorter routes, more truncated trips, high frequency service, those are the things that people value in terms of our localized area. What we're also recognizing is what's known as the Walmart effect. There's the Walmart, there's the apartments that naturally emerge around it. There's the restaurants and there's the retail jobs. Generally, people stay within 5 miles of a radius of a Walmart. It's crazy, but that's what people do. They tend not to, let me drive 14 miles to go to Wegmans, or I'll go to, I use Wegmans a lot, to Walmart. I'm not going to drive across town to go to that Walmart. I'm just going to go to this Walmart. So you can predict and you can pair things together and know what jobs, what food, what retail, what's going to occur because you know your development patterns. If you have high congestion along a corridor because the residential's here and the retail's there, you have to build it. You have no choice because people are wanting to leave that residential area to access the retail area. It's not a transit question. It's not a congestion question. It's a mobility question. People naturally want to go there. So unless you pull those things together and bind them, you are going to have the byproduct, which is the congestion. Congestion's the byproduct. New York City. There are people who never have to leave their borough. They have it all. They don't have to leave more than 10 blocks because they have what they need there. Now, they might work 4 miles uptown, but to them, they dropped into a subway. They went somewhere, they popped out like a gopher, and they just went in a different building. To them, it's all connected. We tend to see things, you know, because we can see the surface, we connect things differently. But I'm not saying that we're in New York City. We don't want to be in New York City. That's our goal, is to not, otherwise we'd be there. But instead, can we ask the same questions? Does a neighborhood have what it needs within a certain distance and zone? If not, you are going to have congestion as a byproduct. And if you aren't going to have some type of service to mitigate the congestion, you are always going to have what you currently have. One thing I want to mention is something called triple convergence theory, and I hope I remember all three. So you have really, really bad traffic. They build FredEx, or they build any new roadway, they add the third lane to the road, and everything's great for about 2 weeks. And now the traffic's back. Why? Because 3 things have happened. When traffic's bad, people say, I'm not going. Number one. Second thing they say is, I'll go at a different time. Or the third is, I'll take a different route. Once you create the new road, they will automatically fill in because they will now take the direct path. You increase that opportunity. You've created the infill. So each time you build more on a main road or you take it somewhere else, you are going to alleviate traffic on secondary and tertiary roads. You want traffic on secondary and tertiary roads because you built them. You paid for them. You've paved them. You've striped them. You've put in traffic signals. They're ADA accessible. They've been planned, engineered. You've got the resources. If you have unused pavement, then you have unused pavement. And it's a resource that communities aren't taking advantage of, and it needs to be thought differently. There's roads across Virginia that I could lay down and take a nap on. No one would bother me for a good solid hour and a half. That's unused resources. So as we start to look at things, we're looking at, hey, how can we connect services, Dumfries Triangle and Quantico? Pulling out fixed route and putting in flexible services, smaller, more nimble vehicles. Might even be more vehicles than we have currently. But the difference is we're able to move more people because we can be more nimble. We don't like to drag buses through parking lots, right? We don't take a back road heavy duty bus. A smaller vehicle can do that. And then we're also going to restructure some commuter services with the opening of the Absco garage. As Todd alluded to, in spring, summer 2024, I believe, or whenever FredEx opens, the proposed partnership is we'll have Route 541, which is from Route 630 to the west side of DC. So your State Department area, just that west side of LaFont Plaza. Route 932 from Falmouth, Route 17 to the Pentagon, then it will cross over into Rosslyn, Boston. So it'll hit Pentagon and then arc over, and then Spotsylvania to Pentagon Navy Yard. Again, hitting Pentagon, but instead of arcing toward Rosslyn, it'll arc up toward Navy Yard. Generally, might even tie in with LaFont Plaza. But we're planning these routes to travel from Spotsylvania, Route 17, and 630 to address some of those congestion and commuter issues because we're faster. We'll be on the hot lanes. But we're not going to be in the neighborhoods where all your commuters are. So all those neighborhoods that have let me go back to it, DOD, State Department, Pentagon, they're all going to have to drive out to those parking lot lots. because there's not some other option for them. And what they're going to do is they're going to drive a car. They're all going to sit at massive traffic lights with 4-minute cycles per green light, because I don't know if it's usually 4 minutes on major intersections. So 4 minutes per, and then they're going to just go a short distance into a park and ride lot. All that congestion, because often the park and ride lot might be like here, they can't get there to there, and we can't stitch a transit vehicle through the neighborhoods. Those are just some of the challenges that you look forward to understand. Hey, why aren't there these solutions? What's missing? How come we can't, or how come Fred doesn't? Some of these very things we've alluded to, or what you're chasing. Decisions that were made 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I believe the oldest building I've seen on Quantico with a date stamp on it is 1919. So we're not fixing that, right? That's something that we're not going to really battle the Marine Corps. When you're trying to create options, recognize that traditional commuting has changed. It's not 5 days a week. It's also not done by 9 in the morning like it used to. It's now commuting all day. People are only going in for their 11 o'clock meeting, and then they're coming home at 2:30. So they've made trips on the off peaks to get to one meeting because they did all their email, all their Zoom stuff early, and then they maybe came here. It's no longer primarily work focused. A lot of people are now using transit because it's about the work is now work from home or remote. They're not using transit to go shopping and get around, especially in more urbanized areas. Flexible schedules, you need later trips. We're looking at how can we as OmniRide operate services as late as 11 o'clock at night. How is that commuter driven? Well, it's not purely commuter driven. But if you're going to be in DC till 10:30, 11 o'clock, you're certainly not taking, if you don't have transit service, you're taking your car in and you're bringing your car home. If there was a way for someone to get home, they would not even need their car in the morning. So those are the things we have to think of differently. Is it going to be super productive service? No. But that car won't be on the highway during the absolute crushing peak, which is your single biggest issue. So is it worth paying for lower productivity at much lower intervals of service later in the evening or the midday to avoid the crush? It might be so. We talked about the expense of building another highway. Congratulations, if you build it, they will come. And that's the fundamental thing. You're just going to fill up that asphalt. And then more roads are more problems, plain and simple. Triple convergence theory, every time you build it, you have to repair it, you have to maintain it, you have to engineer it. And as soon as you try to do something with it, someone's going to be mad about it. That's just the general nature of things, and that's okay. That's how communities evolve. But those are some of the things that from a mass transit perspective, you are facing. And the final thing I'll say is, one size does not fit all. This is just under the umbrella of the Potomac and Rappahannock Transportation Commission. VRE, a successful FAMPO alliance. We have a dedicated telework team that has been encouraging people to telework. I don't look at that as a bad thing. But say, oh, don't you want people to go back to work? No, I really don't want them to make unnecessary trips that bogs down traffic and makes everybody miserable. Stay home. The number of times I've driven to Richmond for a 1-hour meeting, 4 hours in the car for a 1-hour meeting that could have been handled with an email. I love Zoom. Local service, commuter service, and flexible service. You have to have all of them in your community. You have to have some variation of. And the great news is, you've already got part of the FAMPO Alliance through GWRC. You've already got natural telework evolving. The pandemic helped with that. I think I can hear the VRE station. And we'll be in your backyard soon. You have you have Fredericksburg Go, and you have flexible services. So you have the pieces. It's now time to start looking at A, how are we going to fund them? And B, as we march down that path, how are we going to integrate them? Because if all of these things do not operate together, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to have confused services where a person can't ride this to there, or it's hard to get access to this because that's only 5 days a week, but they do this 2 days a week. And I live out in the country where this doesn't come and that doesn't show up. That'll never be there, and that gets too unaffordable. So I have to drive. Now what? You have to have ways to integrate and connect all of these different things. That is my true last slide. Again, I came here to give you a mass transit perspective. This is everywhere, but this is about what are you specifically facing in the I-95 community, and what are the challenges you face as a policy committee. And it's yeoman's work, and you're not going to make anybody happy, but that's okay. This, when you consider what DRPT is doing and how they're trying to fund things, the one thing I advise if you're going through your transit strategic plan, do what we did is we used DRPT money to fund a consultant as part of our strategic plan to figure out how to maximize the merit money and take more money from them. And so they helped, and they were glad to do it because they don't want transit systems to be victims of bureaucracy. They want transit systems to figure out what are they here to reward, what are they here. It's a value statement. And so if they're willing to fund this, go do that. And if it doesn't match up, use your consultant to make recommendations to fund that and this. And that'll maybe bring some of those things into the community so Fredericksburg Go can be more viable beyond just Fredericksburg. Hope I was at least entertaining.
Thank you, Dr. Schneider. Appreciate it. Do we have any questions for him at this time? All right. Appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
A pleasure.
All right.
Honor.
Moving on to item 8C, resolution 23-09, East-West Mobility Study, Phase 2.
So we are not going to go through another presentation on this because we've done this presentation here multiple times. It's been presented at all of the FAMPO committees, if my memory serves, multiple times. And we had truly the longest public comment period of any report we've ever had. People had 60 days to comment, and we took comments from all 4 FAMPO committees before the 60 days, after the 60 days, and we try to integrate all of those things. The final version of this report has got some amendments. We took your comments in terms of which projects you'd like us to take further into the engineering phase. That doesn't include the bridge that folks were talking about earlier. We've also amended, if you want the detail on page 41, it lists the projects that we're going to take forward. And on page 19, there's a very clear statement that the bridge in this report is merely a placeholder, that we're spinning off a separate study to consider those options that were considered earlier. So there's nothing in here you haven't seen except those amendments which I've just explained. We can pull them up by page if you want to see them. We're happy to do that. And then we have the chairman of the CTAC here. The CTAC asked for an amendment to make it even more clear that we're not approving a bridge that connects on the Pinnacle Parkway. And it's up to the policy committee whether they want to add that amendment or not. So, Chair, over to you.
Would you like to discuss the?
Yeah, so
Thank you.
we made the recommendation at the last CTAC meeting to recommend the report to the policy committee. However, we did add that one little bit of emphasis, and during our meeting, Mr. Oz did make the point that it was redundant in the report, and we fully agree with that. However, we wanted to hammer home the fact that the dotted line that you would see on the particular schematic going across the Rappahannock River was nothing more than a dotted line and a placeholder. It did not recommend a particular alignment, just because we thought that when you see a dotted line, people start to make assumptions that the dotted line would be more than a dotted line. So we just want to hammer that home and be redundant on purpose.
All right, thank you. So then my question is, the resolution for 23-09, does it include the language that Mr. Rowe just mentioned?
So if you please pull up page 19. 19. Yeah. Just scroll down, sorry. There. If you look there.
Yeah.
Exact routing of a potential crossing, including whether it would connect directly to Celebrate Virginia or other roads, would not be determined, i.e. not in the study, until subsequent studies are done. And then on page 42 of the report, it lists the things that this study is going to continue working on. And that excludes the Rappahannock crossing. And it says very clearly on page 42 that the crossing project will be spun out into a separate study. So those 5 or 6 options that were mentioned can be studied in more detail, and recommendations will be brought to the policy committee and the jurisdictions that ask for the research on those additional options. So this consultant did not consider options. They merely suggested that if you build another crossing, it will create a grid network and therefore benefit the system by reducing congestion.
Okay.
So that's what this report says. If you adopt the report, all that you're agreeing to is that there was a study, the consultant recommended that we look for another way to cross the river, and that they modeled in the travel demand model what the results would be of having a crossing.
All right, but does it include the C-tax language?
We have not included that sentence. So if you want, just give me the page. If you want, we can add the following sentence. Any alignment, they want it to be added here.
Okay.
Any alignment shown in this report is representative for analysis only. It does not represent a recommended corridor. Environmental and alternative analyses will determine an appropriate corridor and what adjacent roadways should directly connect to the crossing. That is what the CTAC is recommending. And as staff, we don't mind either way because it doesn't change.
Mr. Kelly.
The only thing I'm saying, and again, I'm looking at this as this is 1, way off. 2, there's not the funding for it. 3, there's a long way to go. But I'm reading that, and that's just basically saying we're taking this option off the table. Is that what you're saying?
That's not.
I just said it's. I was just listening to the language you read. It just sounded like it was written to. I mean, if you want to just put a sentence in there and say that there is no defined concept at this point for river crossing, that's fine. Just leave it as simple as that, as opposed to referencing one and then implying. So if you want to put it that way,
I'll happily add a sentence that said that the exact location and nature of the crossing is as yet undefined.
Right, well, I mean,
That's fine.
well, I believe what the C-tax language said is for analysis only, correct?
Right, just because there was a schematic that was included in one of the draft reports that noted a dotted line connecting from one place to another. And, you know, when you see something.
Can I really take a look? I haven't seen it. That's why.
What are you looking for?
I'm looking for the actual language.
Oh, the language, I'm sorry.
Could you type?
Sure.
Yeah, you go, Matt.
Well, no,
I got it.
C-tax.
Dotted line.
Oh,
Sorry.
Roll up. One page. Second page.
So further down.
Oh, I see it. I've got it here.
You got it?
Yeah.
There.
Right.
There's the dotted line. So all that the concern is that we've already decided to connect it to celebrate Virginia Parkway. But as you know, in the language of the report, we've not decided that. This is a schematic line because you have to put a line in the travel demand model.
It says it right there at the bottom. The alignment shown is representative for analysis. It does not represent a recommended corridor.
Oh, it's in.
Like,
Right.
it's literally right there.
So what we did was we actually took that verbiage and then put that in the conclusion section. And it is redundant. We recognize it's redundant. Made that suggestion.
All right, Ms. Bomke.
I'll move for approval of resolution 2309. Yeah. Without the CTAC amendment.
There you go.
So as is?
With the language that Matt indicated earlier.
I'm just saying, I really need to say any alignment shown in this report is for representative analysis only.
You gonna second that then?
Yeah, the rest of it is just too much verbiage.
Are you going to second
Make
that?
a declarative statement, just make a declarative statement. Any alignment shown in this report is representative
Well,
for
okay,
analysis
well,
only.
the motion for Ms.
Yeah.
Bomke is as is.
Correct. And then he's,
Are you?
no,
No.
with his
If
amendment.
there's one
With
sentence.
this one sentence amendment. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
The one sentence covers what you want.
Yes.
You don't
Okay.
need to go into the mention environmental analysis.
All right, any alignment shown in this report is representative for analysis only.
Yeah.
All right, that is the motion and the second on the table. Any further discussion on the motion? Mr. Yakubowski.
Just clarification. So the projects that we're moving forward with do not include the bridge
Go to page 42, please.
on page 41.
There is a list there. So.
Right, I see it.
At the Western Network in Stafford, we're looking at the Harrison Road widening and potential interchange, not actually designing the interchange. And then here is the crossing, right? In other words, we are going to continue working on this, but as a separate project because it needs alternatives analysis. Eventually, it'll need a NEPA study. So there are multiple places at which the policy committee will need to decide whether to continue working on it. At the moment, this consultant that is working for us on this project is not going to do any more work on this river crossing.
So when do we do work on the river crossing?
We are starting already at a staff level. You'll remember last meeting, I brought you that analysis using streetlight data showing you where people are driving from and to. That's part of this separate work that we are already beginning with. So we will at the next meeting or the following one, because March is a special workshop, bring you the alternatives analysis and show you the environmental issues, show you the travel demand model on all 5 or 6 options that we're looking at, and give you a package to show you what we think is viable as an alternative or multiple alternatives. We have not got to the point where we are ready to bring you that. It will be probably another month.
Because I think what we need to do is collectively as a group say, yes, we want a river crossing of some sort, or no. Because we're, putting it into another path, that's fine and all. But what is the timeline on that? Are we dragging our feet? Are you doing it all in-house and then 5 years from now we do a consultant? I mean, if we're going to do it, let's do it and push it forward. If we're not, let's just move on to something else.
So we're going to bring you a report on the analysis we've been doing within the next 2 months.
Okay.
And then you can decide whether to fund a NEPA study,
Okay.
which is more money.
All right.
At that point, you will do that.
If I can make sure I got this square. We have no concepts right now or ideas, no numbers, no anything. This is just a general concept. You're going to take it within the next 2 months, and you're going to come back here, at which point we have to make decisions. And then there's going to be 20 decisions after that, because we've eventually got to come up with a general plan. We've got to come up with a general budget. We have to incorporate it in our long-range plans. We've got a lot of things that would have to do. And at any point, this board can say, screw it, we're not going to do it. It's either too effective, we got other priorities, or whatever else like that. But before you can get to that point, you need to have the general concepts of what it is to say yes or no to. And we're not there yet. So
I do understand that. I was asking when that process was going to be.
I guess it's going to be in 2 months.
Yeah.
You're both correct. You're both correct. By April, we'll bring you a short analysis of what the options might look like, and you can decide whether you want to take it to a NEPA study, an engineering study, and at that point, I'm not supposed to directly address the public, but at that point, the public would need to get involved, because that will be a public participation process, and that's when you need to make your comments.
Chris, I wasn't jumping in. I want to make sure everybody understands, making a decision here, there it is.
No, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I wasn't talking to you, Chris. I was just like.
Right. We want to understand the process.
I'm just saying, in the report here, that was not included.
Right. Understood.
Thank you for clarifying.
Ms. Vanucci.
Okay, so whenever we do have this come forward, just because I think that the Celebrate Virginia Parkway community has sort of been guided a certain direction, and they're maybe very afraid that this is the only option that we're talking about. I really think that we should probably have a much better forum for this discussion, because there's no way we're going to fit 20 or 30. I'm telling you, when we have this discussion come back to this board, there's going to be a lot of public comment, because they're going to be very, very interested, because they've been told that this is literally what is going to happen. They're going to have a river crossing in their neighborhood in a year. And so I want to make sure that we allow the public to be able to be there so they can understand kind of what Matt walked through, what Chris walked through, that it's going to take time, and there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. There was environmental concerns, crossing the Rappahannock, and that will probably alleviate some of the routes that people are concerned about already. And so I just want to make sure that we have a plan to change that location and get that out to people, because this is not a conducive environment to having a large public hearing. I know that we've done, or a public meeting, we've done those at the VDOT building in the past. So maybe we do it there.
Yeah, I think as we get to the public comment period, I agree with you.
But even the next meeting, I think because they're being told that this is what's going to happen to them. I mean, you were here the last you weren't here the last meeting. There were people that were so angry, thinking like we're literally putting a road right through their house, which then it turned out not to be true. So they were like, oh, I feel much better now. So that's why I'm just saying, I think that this could be used to rile them up a little bit.
I see.
And I would rather them hear it straight from us, what we're doing, and come and attend. I love that they're involved. I love that they care about, you know what I mean? I want their feedback because we haven't made any decisions.
Right.
And the things that they've brought forward have been incredibly useful right now and probably, helped us shape these things. So I want to make sure that we're able to hear from them and that they're able to hear from us, more importantly, like what we're presenting in plans.
No, that makes sense. So, all right, then I think that's a very reasonable suggestion. So I think maybe we talk about April being at a meeting at a different location. March, since we're not going to be discussing anything crossing related, we'll stick to here, but maybe in April.
We've waited 25 years. I think we can wait 2 more months.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, like it wouldn't make sense for the March meeting because that's not going to be the agenda. But for the April meeting, maybe we look at alternative locations. Ms. Hagan.
And, I guess this is kind of a silly comment to make, but you mentioned 25 years this has been going on, right? So, and it's how many millions of dollars to do this thing, right? I mean, why can't we focus on something we can really do instead of this project that is, I mean, you're spending staff time doing these analysis on something that frankly is sort of pie in the sky, in my opinion, right? Is that?
Well, it not necessarily. And also, you saw, like, for example, we have these 6-year plans. We have the 2050, long range plans. Hold on, let me. So, part of what we are here to do is to look at projects that may not happen for 15 years, but to include it in our long range plans. So it is within our mission to look at something that may happen when this entire board is completely different.
Right, and I know that oftentimes these projects are way in the future. I get that. I just, if it's been mulled around for 25 years and kicked down the can down the road, it seems like we're kind of still going down that same trajectory. And it just seems like it's such a big project. There's lots of considerations to make, where we don't know where it's going to cross. We have no idea. We know that there's a lot of public input that is against it going where the imaginary line is at this point. And, I'm personally concerned about where it dumps into for us, for spot food.
Sure. And I think that's what April's meeting is going to do. And so if April we decide, no, we're not doing this anymore, that's the information we need to make that decision. But you're absolutely right. We need the information to make the decision.
Thank you.
All right. Yes.
Just want to say I'm glad we're talking about it. I know I'm newer on this board, and when I came on, I know this was something that had been being talked about for so long, and we had sat down, and I said, well, if this happened, what would it look like, and then it started getting revived, and not just because of that, but at least we're having a conversation, to sit around and say we don't have solutions, I don't think it's acceptable for the level of congestion and traffic issues that we deal with here, so I think we'll figure it out, but I'm glad we're
Thank you. All right, so we have a motion and we have a second on the table. Do we have any further discussion on resolution 23-09? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to item 8D, Senate Bill 1137.
I can probably do this very quickly. Senate Bill 1137 is dead. It failed. It passed the committee, went to the General Senate, and failed by 1 vote to pass the Senate, the Virginia Senate. So it has been pulled. This was a bill to propose a transportation authority for our region. The main problem with this bill, quite frankly, is not the content, but it's the way that it was produced. It was produced without consultation of any kind that we can establish. Chip from GWRC and myself went down and spoke to the senator and tried to get a vote, and he admitted it was a rush job because the Senate only meets for 5 or 6 weeks this year, and
there was short time and he had to quickly do it. And he got the idea from reading documents in Stafford and speaking to one or two people, we don't know who. Anyway, that's how this bill got here. When we produced this agenda, we didn't know if this bill was going to succeed or not. So we thought we should update you on it to tell you what happened. It hasn't succeeded. However, the point I think that I would like to make from the staff perspective is this concept keeps coming back. We had it under previous people who are not even elected anymore. And
Hopefully never will be.
this was discussed tonight at GWRC. And my recommendation to you all, that's part of my job description, is to recommend things to you, is that we, in that April-May timeframe, when we're going to talk about future funding for our projects in this region, we include a discussion of whether we like the idea of a regional transportation authority or not, right? So that we have a little bit more time, we've thought through the issue, so that if this thing pops up again in the future, we then have a measured, thought through FAMPO response, GWRC response. At the moment, we don't. What happens is these things hit us out of the blue because somebody dreams up this concept, and we then have to run around trying to find out what's in it, consult lawyers, get hold of all of you to say, should we squash this, etc. We don't want to do that again in future, because this is the third time this has happened, and I've only been here 3 years. So it's like a once a year thing. So we would like to have a discussion, and I'm suggesting that when we talk about funding for projects, like maybe a river crossing bridge or a BRT bus or a tunnel under the I-95, VDOT is smiling at me, we talk through the funding. So we have a whole meeting where we can talk about the funding for the future and what we think we should be doing about it. So just to alert you, it's dead, it's not going anywhere, but I'm quite certain that before I'm no longer at FAMPO, unless you all decide to fire me at some point, I'm quite certain this thing's going to come back again in a different form via a different person. So I would suggest we just discuss it when we're talking about funding for our projects, then we can decide yay or nay or maybe, whatever. But it's up to you to decide what. That's my suggestion and my advice to you as the FAMPO administrator.
Well, and I'm sorry.
Yes, Ms.
And what was brought up at GWRC is that Caroline County and King George County do not have a seat at this table, and that we have to be, good citizens for them too, right? To make sure that they don't get roped into something that potentially
absolutely
be a negative to them. So just for those that weren't here for GWRC, that was a conversation that we had.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Anybody who's been on this board long for any period of time knows that, this is a conversation I would at least like to have at some point, because you're talking about a bridge over the Rappahannock being too expensive, and two interchanges requested by Spotsylvania County are a lot more expensive than that bridge is going to be. And we don't have the funding, if any major project, to leverage to make those projects happen. And we need to have this discussion, because that's what's killing us, just to say that. But the other aspect of it, which was really bad with what happened here, is transportation authority does not have to be the entire PDC. You only require 2 localities to make a transportation authority start and work. So, this is a conversation of who wants to be in what it is. If you look at the Hampton Roads, you look at Northern Virginia, they're 2 different animals in the sense of how they're organized, how they're funded, how they pick their projects. But that is a discussion, to everybody's point, that needs to be here. Hampton Roads picked a project initially that they were going to build, they wanted to spend the money on. Northern Virginia was a little bit more broader, and they have funding formulas for certain jurisdictions get to spend so much of their own money. There are 2 different models. And, that's part of the discussion we need to have. If we were to go down this road, what would it look like? Who would be involved? But again, I was listening on the conversation at GWRC. The immediate assumption was, well, if it's going to be PD 16, then we're all going to have to be here. And that may be the case, and we all should be. But 2 jurisdictions, and they have to be contiguous jurisdictions, is all required of the transportation.
Sure. Dr. Snyder.
One other thing I would just point out, and I think I've mentioned this here before, the way modern transportation funding, roadway, transit, doesn't matter, and Todd said it, will apply to the internet, the IAJA, whatever the infrastructure bill is. That's going to be incentivized for match money. Is it, how close is it to design ready? Do you have the money in the bank? If you don't have those questions answered, you will not ever get the money. So in the concept of, let's just, if you want to, whatever the dotted line on the map is, if you want to build something, do you want to pay for it all locally? If not, I assume the answer is no, that you would like a little bit of state money or you would like a little bit of federal money.
A lot of federal money.
So if you want a lot of federal money, you're going to have to access that pool of funds, and it's the infrastructure bill. And the federal government rewards communities that incentivize the funding structures and the mechanisms. It is a carrot-based system. That is the complete design. It's engineered that way. It's crafted that way. If you want it, you can have it. You just have to do the things that, from a federal policy perspective, you want done. And the number one thing is having money in the bank ready to go. So if you're looking for that big picture, whatever, it doesn't have to be an authority, doesn't have to be a commission. You just have to have the mechanism if you want those things. Otherwise, it's 100% local, and have at it. And that's just the challenge.
Yeah, the local match to get the federal dollars. You've always got to have a bit of local match.
Sure. All right.
Chairman,
Mr.
I
Jakubowski.
would say that that is actually us agreeing on what that project is.
Yeah.
See, that's even bigger. We can have all the money in the world and we can fight over what project is going to happen. We need to come together on those things first, as much as we can. Because you can always have an election where a couple of members get elected and then 5 years old.
Yeah,
found
that one out.
Down the drain.
Couldn't agree with you more.
So,
Yes.
but, and that's why, it can't be hard and fast, but it has to be a concept of this river crossing is local traffic. I don't like the connection. I understand you guys want the, I-95 interchange, but it's the local connection. The transit isn't gonna help the I-95 backup that was there today and all the traffic that was up and down Route 1. But more local connections to get around easier, not
Correct.
massive roads, but more connections. And so it needs to be more of a philosophical debate or discussion and moving forward on that. Then we'll figure out, because that's always going to be that one piece that we can never really get.
I 100% agree with you in particular. And you remember my slide at the very beginning saying
Stop right there.
each of those months, right?
At one time.
Let's have the congestion workshop to talk about that, which leads to a list of projects, which leads to the vision, which leads to then how do we fund it? So it all lines up.
Ms. Gary.
Yeah, just really quick, because an interchange was mentioned, I'm pretty certain it was it unanimous, that there was a proposed connection if the bridge happened to also take it to 95, right? And everyone kind of went, oh, no. So I think there's no real appetite for that from the rest of us, from what we've been over.
There's a lot of
other things going on.
There's so much has to get discussed.
That was touched on. I think it was very important to say that we all just kind of like,
Fair.
not what we
Nope.
envisioned.
Multiple options.
Appreciate it.
Yes, other project.
What-
would be great.
Ms. Bonke, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to say that, as a policy committee, if we really want to be on top of our game and really study this, if we want to move forward, we have to have everything in place, our I's dotted, our T's crossed by August, in order to have things in front of the General Assembly. We have a lot of elections coming up on the November ballot. We don't even know who our electors will be. But we need to be prepared to move quickly and be prepared and ready to take action and be like Fairfax is. I mean, Fairfax has all their legislation done by the end of the summer. They might have a few little things, a few little stragglers, but we would have to work really hard this summer to come up with something if we want to move in that direction. Be eligible for any additional IGA money. And Bob, Dr. Schneider, I don't know what other options are there, whether you call it an authority, and it doesn't matter what we call it. But what other options are out there for match money besides that?
Realistically, if you're looking at match funds, you either have to have cold hard cash or in kind, like land donated as the in kind infrastructure.
If you're looking for what different mechanisms do you have to raise those funds where you don't have to create an authority, single best thing I'd suggest is either hire an attorney to comb the law and find out what you're allowed to do. Do you raise the money as independent localities? Do you put it in a pool? Do you organize it through some? I don't know what the laws are. I really don't. I don't have to deal with that, luckily. But there, at some point, there are mechanisms in the law, and if you don't like the mechanisms, that's when the general said you create your own legislation to give you what you want. And I went through this previously in South Carolina when we were trying to pass a tax to fund transit. There was nothing that would allow us to have just what we wanted, and there was no way in heck the legislature was going to give us what we wanted. So instead, we found out what we were permitted, and we tucked underneath that and got what we needed.
So unfortunately, I have to cut this discussion short. We have just found out that our next item, the consultant has to drop at 9:35. That's 20 minutes from now. So in the interest of time, I appreciate the discussion. There's much more to be had, but we have to move on to item 8E, the adoption of the Freight Summit report and the presentation.
You have a nice printed copy, policy committee members and alternates, but you did have it emailed to you with the agenda. We've got Chris Lamb from Cambridge Systematics who facilitated the summit workshop and has drafted this report together with some input from our staff. So Chris, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you loud and clear again.
Great. So Chris has put together just a very few slides just to summarize for you basically what's in the report, and then we're asking you to please adopt the report. Chris, over to you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
Great, thank you, and I apologize for the time crunch. Just family, and it's snowing like crazy here. So, so if you could go to the next slide, please. So I just want to give you guys a quick overview of the objectives and participants who participate in the Freight Summit and why FAMPO elected to conduct a Freight Summit. Give an overview of the topics that were discussed at the summit, some surveys that went out to kind of supplement that input, and then some of the key findings and next steps that FAMPO can take with those findings. Next slide, please. So the reasons to conduct a Freight Summit were really that, FAMPO staff have been doing a lot of analysis of different types of data, trying to get a handle on some of the key issues impacting the movement of goods in the Fredericksburg area. And it's good to supplement that data analysis with the real experiences of companies that move goods, both the shippers that generate freight shipments, as well as the carriers, such as trucking companies, railroads, et cetera, that move the goods. So we convened an in-person summit hosted at the FRA, and gathered a number of both public sector and private sector representatives or stakeholders in freight to discuss some of the key issues related to moving freight in this region, talk about some of the regional and also kind of macro big picture trends and the potential impacts that those might have on the movement of goods in the Fredericksburg region, as well as identify some key needs that could be addressed through the transportation planning process. Next slide, please. So we started with just kind of an overview of what the critical freight network in the region is. And not surprisingly, Interstate 95 is kind of a key component of the region's freight transportation system. It moves a lot of trucks, as you'll see in subsequent slides. But we also have, Route 17, Route 1, Route 3, providing, in some cases, some reliever service to I-95, but also making connections to the interstate and to various communities within and beyond the region. We also have CSX operating a pretty busy freight rail line north-south through the region that also passenger service operates on as well. Next slide, please. So focusing a bit on I-95 in particular and the highway network, Truck traffic and delays are pretty common themes in the region. We have the busiest freight corridor in the Commonwealth here, nearly 22,000 trucks per day on average. That makes us busier than highways like I-81, which we think of as kind of a notorious truck highway. We have higher volumes here. And we also have a lot of delays. Nearly a quarter of the highway network in the FAMPO region ranks among the high or very high delay categories in the state. And that means we have a higher proportion, but also a higher number of miles that have very high delay for trucks than other regions in the state. We have 32 miles that have very high truck delay miles. That's more than the Hampton Roads area and the Richmond area combined, and those are much larger regions. Next slide, please. Perhaps not surprisingly, due to not just freight traffic, but also passenger traffic, we have a lot of delays on Interstate 95. ATRI, the American Transportation Research Institute, they research trucking industry issues. They release a list of top 100 truck bottlenecks in the United States. And I-95 in Stafford County is number 70 on that list because there is quite a bit of recurring congestion on that roadway. The average speed for trucks over a 24-hour period is 48 miles per hour. And that condition has been deteriorating 10% in the year between 2020 and 2021. So there's some input there in that orange box from our Freight Summit participants when we were talking about this. They said that it was not at all surprising that I-95 would be among the top bottlenecks in the country, and that the time of day in which we see the biggest speed reductions, which is late afternoon, is consistent with their observations from their own operations in the region. Next slide, please. When it comes to safety, and Ian had a slide on this theme as well, between 2011 and 2020, so that's a 10-year period, we had 50 fatal crashes involving large trucks, and this is in the entire GWPDC region. 44% of those fatal crashes are on Interstate 95. Truck-involved fatal crashes have been trending upward statewide over that 10-year period, had been relatively flat locally, at least through 2020, but it looks like some more recent data showing 2021, 2022 is seeing a slight uptick in fatal truck-involved crashes here in this region as well. Next, please. When it comes to looking at some trends, so the growth of e-commerce has had quite a bit of impact on how goods move, as well as the quantity of goods that move and where they're moving. So e-commerce certainly spiked quite a bit, or increased, I should say, quite a bit during the COVID-19 pandemic's early days. In 2020 alone, there is a nearly 33% increase in e-commerce sales in the United States. That growth rate has slowed down a little bit since, in part because 33% a year is not really sustainable, but also some of the challenges related to supply chain, as well as some economic uncertainty going on through 2022, kind of reduce the rate of growth in e-commerce sales, but they are still growing. E-commerce has interesting impacts on goods movement because it represents change in how consumer products, durable goods such as furniture, autos, and home furnishings, as well as non-durable goods like food, apparel, things like that, are being moved between various distribution centers and fulfillment centers, and then ultimately a last mile move to the consumer's doorstep. companies have been, I think as the next slide shows, been developing much more warehousing and distribution center space to accommodate that growing demand. So e-commerce requires about 3 times the logistics space of traditional retail because, again, you're moving product as close to consumers as possible in order to give that next day or 2-day delivery. And also, you're fulfilling the orders. So you have to have more space to accommodate that packing of individual consumers' orders. And Americans return 30% of the items that they buy online. So there needs to be space to receive and process those returns. So that means a bigger distribution center footprint for e-commerce than traditional retail. And that growth in e-commerce demand has been contributing to quite a bit of industrial real estate demand growth and development of new space. So we have 11 million square feet of distribution centers in the FAMPO region, 3.3 million square feet of warehousing space in the region. And according to the FRA, they noted that we've got nearly 5 million square feet of additional space that's permitted in the area. So more industrial real estate development happening that generates more truck trips of large trucks that are supplying those facilities with new product, as well as smaller vehicle trips making some of those last mile deliveries. Next slide, please. So in addition to conducting an in-person summit, there's a series of surveys that went out. There's one that was aimed toward companies that ship goods or that generate loads of freight and other logistics companies. And we had a slightly different survey, more tailored to motor carriers or trucking companies, to get a sense of how things like congestion on I-95 and other highways impact their businesses specifically. What needs or issues do they encounter in this region that from their perspective need addressing, and so forth. So those surveys were available online, links widely shared through social media. I think Becky was even at a truck stop or two or a rest area trying to distribute the survey as well. And so that input helped us to supplement the findings we were getting from the summit. Next slide, please. So what are some of the key findings that we got from all of this outreach? One was, some concurrence with some of the data points that we're looking at. So there's agreement that congestion and delays are major problems in the area, and that increases the cost of moving goods. That industrial real estate demand is expected to remain strong for years to come. That there has been a leveling off of growth in consumer product demand observed through 2022. Still growth, is just happening at a bit of a slower rate. And that there are supply chain challenges globally have increased the cost of transporting and importing goods. So one of our participants noted that the cost of moving a container from China to Virginia had increased nearly 8-fold between 2019 and 2021. So that's a substantial increase in the cost of moving goods, and that has contributed to rising prices for consumers as well. Next slide, please. There are some location-specific needs that summit participants and survey takers had identified. Interstate 95, the entire length of the corridor within the region, is identified as kind of a bottleneck and an issue when it comes to congestion and moving freight efficiently. Route 1 and to a lesser extent Route 17 were identified as relievers to I-95 when there's an incident on I-95 in particular, but can experience congestion on their own, particularly if there is a lot of truck traffic bailing off of I-95 onto those other highways. One of the participants noted that a resolution in King George County to restrict truck through movements on Route 206 could have impacts on truck volumes on routes 3 and 301. There is note of potential bypass of Route 3 in the vicinity of King George Courthouse. And then new warehousing development is happening or expected to happen in kind of 3 different areas there in those sub bullets. And that warehousing, generates some jobs and revenues, but also that there are potential infrastructure burdens that come from the increased truck traffic and so forth. So down in Caroline County, about 1.2 million square feet is presently under construction, according to the FRA. Just south of you guys in Hanover County, there are several new warehouses that are in the pipeline down there that could generate additional truck trips on the Interstate 95 corridor. And then one of the participants noted that down in Stafford County around Centerpoint Parkway, that some recently completed distribution centers in that area were generating some additional truck trips and contributing to congestion in that area. When it comes to mode shift in technology, there was some discussion about moving more freight by rail. The CSX freight line does carry quite a bit of freight by train, but not all freight is divertible to rail. Rail is most cost effective for longer distance trips because there's kind of there's a startup cost and a get off cost to get onto rail. And so that cost kind of gets made up for in a lower per mile transit cost. But again, that happens when you start getting to distances. The rule of thumb is generally 400 to 500 miles. So longer distance trips are where freight rail is typically more cost effective. And for shorter distance trips, and especially local trips, door-to-door service by truck is pretty hard to beat. When it comes to technology, a lot of the technology discussion focused on electrification of trucks and some of the key challenges associated with that, particularly for longer distance truck moves. Where you'd have to have a large battery on the vehicle, but also kind of a vast network of fast charging stations with the capacity to charge a large truck. And there's challenges with utility capacity and things like that make a network like that appear to be pretty far off in the future. There's also issues with equipment availability. If you are ordering electric trucks, it could be years before you get the equipment manufactured and delivered. But short distance truck trips may be most easily transitioned to electric or other alternative fuels, particularly if you have charging capacity at the home base of the fleet. Where presumably those trucks would be, home overnight and could be charged up and then do their local tours and come back. Next slide, please. Some other issues brought up by participants include, truck driver shortage, which has been an issue for many, many years. However, the pandemic has made it worse. And we have kind of an aging out of the truck driver population. Unreliability and delays, mean higher fuel and labor costs and customer dissatisfaction. So when you have unreliability of travel times, you sometimes have to plan for a trip to take longer than it may actually take. So if it takes 3 hours to get from Fredericksburg to Manassas on the worst day, you may plan for that trip to take 3 hours every time, even though most days it may only take an hour or so. So that means you're having to pay more for your labor to be available for those 3 hours in many cases. Truck parking is also a major operational and safety issue. Truck drivers have to comply with strict hours of service regulations. meaning they cannot drive more than 11 hours without taking a rest. And there simply are not enough places for truck drivers to pull off safely and rest somewhere. Between public rest areas, private truck stops, there just isn't the room. So you see them parking in unsafe locations oftentimes. Next slide, please. When it comes to next steps, so what to do with these findings? Certainly FAMPO as members can work to integrate these findings into the planning process, such as expanding the incorporation of freight and freight considerations into the LRTP and congestion management process, investigating area-specific needs that were a few slides back through planning studies and looking at the project programming, and then potentially developing a regional freight plan that would take a more comprehensive view of freight needs and issues, and or expand upon the data analysis and stakeholder engagement to flesh out some of the issues that have been identified and identify others that may have been missed by the participants that we had in the room. And then some recommendations regarding maintaining and expanding freight stakeholder engagement. So this was kind of the first big attempt by FAMPO to engage a community of freight stakeholders. They're often hard for public agencies to engage because the public planning process has planning horizons that are decades long, and freight companies are often thinking of how they're going to move things today and tomorrow. So it's a challenge to engage them and keep them engaged. So that can be facilitated by continuing to host freight summits on an annual or maybe biannual basis, by establishing a regional freight advisory committee, which could be particularly helpful if FAMPO does develop a regional freight plan. Producing a program of brown bag presentations on freight relevant topics, particularly if they have a connection to local needs, issues, and operations. And then reaching outside the traditional freight companies and agencies that have kind of a major stake in freight to include some other constituencies that have interest in freight as well. So certainly when it comes to, for example, the industrial warehousing development, there's certainly a freight interest in terms of the trucks, traffic, and freight moving inbound and outbound from those facilities. But there are also considerations when it comes to workforce and how workers get to those jobs, what transit services or bicycle pedestrian infrastructure exists to connect people with those jobs, et cetera. There are certainly community impact and environmental impact considerations, and so engaging stakeholders with interest in those areas. There's a bit of overlap with some freight themes. So that's a high-level overview of the Freight Summit and the key findings coming out of it. And as Ian mentioned and showed and included in the agenda packet, the full report is available with a little bit more info.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lamb. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of information for us to digest, and we've got the presentation here and the summary report. So thank you so much for all the work that you've done. Do we have any questions for Mr. Lamb at this time? All right, Mr. Lamb, thank you so much for your time. We'll let you get back to your family.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Very well, everyone.
All right, thank you so much. So at this time, asking for a motion of adoption of the Freight Summit report.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Mr. Keller.
Just a quick comment. Our concern here is congestion by tractor trailers on the 95 corridor, not a lot of the other things that they're talking about. And frankly, unless you're telling me otherwise, our ability as a local MPO to affect policy on Interstate 95 with tractor trailers is limited. I mean, we've talked to the state for years about enforcing the law and keeping trucks out of left lanes and stuff and traffic movement. So I'm trying to get a handle on, I'm going to approve this, but I'm trying to figure out a lot of what we just talked about is something that we really don't need to, nor can we, or have any impact on whatsoever.
So, quick comment, we have already made some progress in convincing OIP that we need to change the metrics that they use to measure freight in in the state of Virginia, because it affects the funding that we have to upgrade 17 or Route 3 or whatever else where we have freight traffic. And they've already agreed with us that those metrics do need to be updated because they measure tonnage. They don't measure number of trucks and volume of trucks.
Okay,
And we've got the most trucks of any region
That's
of
fine.
Virginia.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm just saying a lot of what came out of this is.
Right, so maybe we can, maybe what came out of this is hopefully an argument
It's
for
going to be educational, but
OIP.
from the standpoint of what we can impact or want to impact is.
Yeah, it is. I
can't,
agree.
We can't rebuild I-95, you're right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not
All
something
right.
we can do.
But just comment on that, when we do rezonings, we're gonna be adding to the truck traffic, so that is something that we should keep in mind.
Oh, no, I agree with you on that. There are certain things we can do as localities and, when we approve these things, how do we deal with it, what we'd be asking for?
Right.
But beyond that, it's.
Placement of warehouses and access roads to the warehouses and convincing OIP to give us money to widen those roads that are the freight corridors.
The local
Those are the
corridors.
things we can do something about.
Agreed. All right, we have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. In the interest of time, unless anyone has a real objection, I'd like to propose that we postpone items 8F and 8G for a future meeting.
Don't move.
Yes.
Fine.
Second. Motion and second to amend the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
We thought you'd agree.
Sure,
Aye, motion
air
carries.
mattresses.
That's to get here. We can ride it out.
No, we're done.
It won't be that long to get back this hour. Any correspondence at this time?
We've already showed you the letter from Jane Leeds. There is that, sorry, I just can't see this text.
That's the grant award.
That is the grant award letter. You already know that. You've already seen the letter from Jane Leeds. So I think that's all we've got for you.
All right.
Done.
Fantastic. Staff and agency reports.
Staff have no new reports. We've given you too much already.
All right. Any comments from a board member?
Just a quick one.
Yes.
I just want to circle back on the comments we were talking about, the discussion with regards to funding, bringing Bob's and it's kind of back together again. With regards to funding, the projects we're looking at, no matter what you find out and look at and what you can do, bonding, whatever else like that, locality by itself cannot do the projects that we need to do in this region. It's going to have to be a regional approach. So we do need looking at a regional approach, which is a regional funding formula of how to do that. But to Chris's point, it's going to have to be based on agreeing on what those projects are. Because again, it's not only Hampton Roads and North Virginia, we now have the Richmond Transportation Authority of understanding, well, just looking at some other jurisdictions. So this is now going to be the nature of the game. And if we want to sit back and not have this conversation, we're not going to be getting a lot of projects funded in the future. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. All right. At this time, would you read the motion to enter the closed session?
I move to the Fredericksburg Area Metropolitan Planning Organization closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3711A1 for the discussion and consideration of a personnel matter concerning the FAMPO administrator's position.